She Who Roared for Mercy. Chapter 1. The roar Chicago could not understand. Chicago had learned to live with noise. The trains screamed along their tracks. Car horns filled the intersections. Sirens traveled through neighborhoods at every hour of the day. People argued, laughed, prayed, cried, celebrated, and struggled beneath the enormous Chicago sky. Noise was nothing new. But this was different. At 6:17 in the morning, the city heard a roar unlike anything it had ever heard before. The sound rolled across Chicago like thunder. Windows shook. Cars stopped. Birds scattered from rooftops. People stepped outside and looked toward the skyline. For several seconds, nobody knew what they had heard. Then the second roar came. This one was longer. Deeper. There was something inside it that frightened people even more than its volume. It sounded almost like a voice. News stations immediately began broadcasting emergency reports. Something enormous had been seen near the lake. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew where it had come from. Nobody knew why it was there. And nobody knew what it wanted. Military aircraft began moving toward the area. Police established emergency perimeters. People were told to remain indoors. Social media exploded with photographs, videos, theories, arguments, and fear. Some people called her a demon. Others called her an alien. Some said she was another Godzilla. Others insisted she was something completely different. Nobody agreed about anything. Except one thing. She was enormous. And she was coming closer. B.J. Mayfield was watching the television when the third roar came. He had been sitting quietly, listening to the reporters argue over what they thought they were seeing. Then he heard her. B.J. stopped. His eyes narrowed. He turned down the television. The room became quiet. Then he heard the roar again. B.J. stood. Something about it was different. He could not explain it. The sound was enormous, but underneath the enormous sound was something else. Words. B.J. stared toward the television. The reporter was speaking, but B.J. was no longer listening to him. He was listening to her. Please. B.J. froze. The sound came again. Please. He moved closer to the television. The reporters were calling it an attack. The military was preparing defensive measures. People were screaming. But B.J. heard something nobody else seemed to hear. I am not here to hurt anyone. B.J. whispered. What? Another roar shook the city. This time, B.J. heard the complete message. I do not want to hurt anyone. B.J. stared at the screen. The enormous creature stood in the distance, surrounded by military aircraft. She looked terrifying. And somehow, B.J. could hear her fear. He could hear her confusion. And underneath everything else, he could hear her desperation. She was truly trying to communicate. B.J. grabbed his jacket. Before leaving, he looked once more at the television. The reporter shouted that military forces were authorized to respond if the creature became aggressive. B.J. shook his head. Everybody is listening to the sound, he said quietly. But nobody is listening to what she's saying. He stepped outside. The streets were filled with people trying to see what was happening. Some were running away. Others were recording videos. Police officers were directing traffic. B.J. continued toward the area where the creature had been seen. He did not know exactly why he was going. He only knew that somebody needed to listen. Several miles away, she who roared for mercy stood near the lake. She was enormous. Her presence made the city look small. Yet despite her size, she was not attacking. She stood still. Her enormous eyes watched the helicopters circling above her. She raised her head. The helicopters moved closer. She became frightened. A low rumble came from her chest. The soldiers interpreted the sound as aggression. She's getting ready to attack. Weapons were prepared. She heard the movement. She became even more frightened. Then she roared. The entire city heard it. But BJ heard something different. Please. He stopped walking. Please tell them I am not their enemy. BJ looked toward the enormous creature. I hear you. She became still. For the first time since she had appeared, something changed. Her head slowly turned. She looked toward him. Thousands of people were between them. Buildings stood between them. Military forces surrounded her. But somehow, she heard him. BJ raised his hand. I'm listening. The creature lowered her head. The helicopters continued circling. BJ looked at the soldiers. Stop. Nobody listened. He raised his voice. Stop. A military officer approached him. Sir, you need to leave this area immediately. BJ looked toward the creature. She isn't attacking. The officer answered. How do you know that? BJ looked at him. Because she's telling me. The officer stared at him. She is telling you. BJ nodded. Yes. The officer looked toward the creature. Then back toward BJ. How? BJ took a breath. I don't know. He looked at the enormous creature again. But I can hear her. She roared again. BJ listened. This time, her message was different. They are coming. BJ looked toward the lake. Who? She turned her head. Far beyond the city, something moved beneath the water. The lake began to rise. BJ's expression changed. The creature looked toward the horizon. They are coming for me. BJ looked back at the military officer. You need to move everyone away from here. The officer frowned. Why? BJ answered quietly. Because she's not the only enormous creature in Chicago anymore. A distant roar answered from beyond the lake. Everyone heard it. The military officer turned. The water erupted. Something enormous rose from beneath the surface. People screamed. She who roared for mercy stepped forward. BJ looked up at her. She roared. This time, BJ understood every word very clearly. Do not let them destroy my enemies. BJ stared at her. Even now. She looked toward the approaching creature. Yes, even now. BJ understood. She did not want revenge. She wanted peace. And now, BJ had a problem. Chicago wanted to destroy the monsters. The monsters wanted to destroy one another. And the one creature who could potentially stop the war was asking BJ to help save even the creatures who were coming to destroy her. BJ took a deep breath. He looked toward the enormous enemy. Then he looked up at she who roared for mercy. All right, he said. But we're going to have to find another way. She lowered her head. BJ placed his hand against the enormous scales of her shoulder. I'll help you. Her eyes closed. For the first time since she had arrived in Chicago, she was calm. And somewhere beneath the waters of Lake Michigan, another enormous creature opened its eyes. The battle had not begun. But the war had already arrived. And Chicago had no idea that the man standing beside the monster of peace was about to become the bridge between creatures, people, fear, and mercy.